Well, it is so great to be back with all of you this week. I was calculating it up back there. I think this is the fourth week of the sermon series. Is that right?
Yeah, we're in the fourth Sunday of Lent, and the prodigal's daughter has returned. And so we are so glad to have Carol back with us. Carol has spent some time with family over spring break, and then in the United Methodist Church, we are part of a connectional denomination, and she went and was at Spring Valley last week, preaching for a friend of hers who was out on their spring break. And so, Carol, it's just good to have you back in the building.
Yeah, it's so fun to be back. When I saw Megan in the booth, she said, well, look who it is. So anyway, I'm so happy to be back on this fourth week in Lent, and we are in a series called In the Clearing. And we've basically told you now, Vaughn mentioned it, and prodigal daughter over here, we're talking about the story of the prodigal son, which I know is a familiar story to most of us. You've probably read it many times, but Christopher and I have had some ideas of how we look at this story in a new way today. So I'm going to read the story again to remind you all of what happens and some of the specific movement and language. It's in chapter 15, and I'm going to read verses 11 through 32. This is what it says. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked him what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" So what a story, right? We find ourselves lots of things going on here, but maybe we kind of start with this decision that the younger son makes to leave his father.
Yeah, we are talking about a clarity of connection, right? And I think the very first thing that happens here is this younger son is lost in disconnection. He doesn't see any value in his relationship with his dad. How do we know that? So you might be thinking, well, Christopher, he doesn't say that in the story, but he does. He looks at him and he says, "Give me my half of the property. I want what belongs to me." Which is basically him saying, I want what you can offer me, but I don't want anything to do with you. And in the ancient world, this is akin of saying, I wish you were dead. And I can't wait around for you to die. You're going to take too long. And so I just want what's mine now so I can go live my life. And so there's a disconnection there. He doesn't see any value in his relationship with the Father. And I think about all the times that we do this in our own relationships, right? There's a disconnect. We don't see any value in it until it's either the relationship has changed in some way or it's gone in a different way. And you kind of have a silly story about that. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know that you meant to share this, but it involves donuts.
Yeah. So every now and then on Saturday mornings, we'll go and get donuts. And yesterday morning, Charlotte, my daughter, who is 6, decided that she wanted donuts. And so she went in and convinced her brother that he also wanted donuts. He's 10.
Genius strategy.
Yeah, very smart. And so they're both like, Mom, we want donuts. So I'm like, okay, you know.
My kids do the opposite strategy. They send the baby to me.
Yeah, well, hey, I'd say yes to anything Audrey wanted. She's so cute. So anyway, they come to me. They both want donuts, and I'm tired, and I'm like, yeah, I'm still in my pajamas, but we get in the car, and we go, and we get there, and we're able to park just right in front of this donut store. It's the donut store up on 423 in Maine. I think it's just called Donut, but I highly recommend. I mean, very fresh, very good donuts. Anyway, we pull in right in front, and Charlotte's, hey, Mom, can I go in by myself? And I can see her and everything, and I'm like, all right, but you remember what your brother wanted, and then you can pick some things for you. And she's like, okay, I'm going in. So she goes in, and I watch her, 6-year-old. She has my wallet and is acting like an adult, goes up to the counter and, gets her brother's 3 glazed donuts and gets herself an iced donut and some donut holes. I'm watching the whole thing go, and she taps the credit card and is just super proud of herself. She walks out with the bag hanging on her arm and jumps into the car, and I'm like, Sissy, how did it go? She was like, well, she thanked me and told me to have a good day, so, I'm just so great. And I said, well, gosh, you almost don't need mommy anymore. And she said, well, I need your wallet. And I told Christopher, because we had been studying this week, I was like, felt very prodigal son-ish to me. She didn't need mommy anymore, but she is going to need my wallet to continue going into places and making purchases.
Yeah, but it's so funny, right? Because she's not thinking about all that the connection to mom offers.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
The drive to the store, the support and encouragement needed to have the courage to go into a store by yourself at 6 years old, the skill to even know how to tap a credit card or how to talk to a stranger, right? All of that has come from your coaching as a parent.
Sure.
But in the moment, she didn't see that. Like, I can live on my own. I just need your wallet. I'll be good to go, right?
Right.
And that's the mentality of this prodigal son.
Absolutely.
Right? And he begins with the language of disconnection. Father, give me. Right? It's a disconnection of language, right? In the same way that you kind of feel disconnected when your daughter looks at you and goes, I just want your wallet, and if you don't mind chauffeuring me everywhere, that would be cool too, right?
Right.
But there's a disconnect there, and he wants the Father's things, but he doesn't want anything to do with the Father himself. And I think we all know what that's like. We all know that moment, right? To chase after independence, only to find ourselves really lonely, and to mistake freedom for isolation. And so this younger son ends up in a faraway country. But he's not just far away geographically. He's also far away relationally. And he ends up also far away culturally, right? Because he ends up in the midst of losing everything, right? His friendships and his connections in the faraway country are based off of his monetary wealth. And when that disappears, he didn't have anything. And he finds himself feeding the pigs, which in the Jewish Old Testament law, that's an unclean animal. So he's also now unclean himself. And so he is by himself geographically, relationally from his family, and culturally from his community. He can't go participate in anything that's going on that might relate to his culture because he's unclean and he hasn't gone through any purification rituals. And so he is apart. And then in the midst of being apart, he finally remembers home. And what I love about that is, as he's thinking about it, he's not thinking about perfection. He's not thinking about all the things that go right at home. He's thinking about the connection. And the connection that he makes is, I really screwed up. I can't be my father's son anymore because I basically told him I want you to be dead and I don't want anything to do with you. But my father is a place, and my father's house is a place where love resides. And if I go back, even my father's servants are treated better than the people here, and I'm going to go back and be a servant. I think grace begins when we remember where love lives.
Yeah.
And he does, and he decides to go home.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting moment because there's this line, right, where he says he came back to himself, who he always was. And that makes me think about how we in our own lives sometimes find ourselves way out there for whatever reason. We might not be taking our parents' inheritance and just wasting it all away, but we may have found ourselves chasing after something that is so far from home for us. And as you highlighted, I think the real beautiful moment here is having that sense of home to go back to, of love and grace to go back to. I think we see that in some of our physical homes. We feel like it's a place of love and grace. But I think what we're about to see as we continue through this story is that God offers us this continual home. So as we look at what's next, I think we see it in an even bigger way.
Yeah, what I love about the story, right, is this idea of the son has been disconnected. Mm-hmm. He doesn't feel anything. He didn't find value in his relationship with his father. He found value in what his father could offer him. And now he is beginning to see some kind of connection. But he doesn't go back home expecting the relationship to be the same.
That's right.
Right? He has no expectation that when he goes home, he's going to still have his same role, his same place, his same value inside the family system. He's going back with the expectation that he's going to now be a servant. Mm-hmm. Which hold on to that thought, because guess what? The older son already has the expectation that he's a servant and not a son. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's a flip that happens in that story. Mm-hmm. But what's so interesting is he goes back with this idea, and he begins to rehearse this speech, right, that we hear in the scriptures, right? Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I've sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And I've always imagined as he goes down the road back home that he's just saying this over and over again, right? Trying to get ready to say it to his dad. He's looking in the stream and he's saying it to his reflection in the stream, and he's just saying it to the birds as he's walking. Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I've sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And as he is on the road home, right, the scriptures say that the father is looking for him, right? The father is looking for him. And as he is waiting, right, the father sees him off in the distance, and filled with compassion, right, he goes running towards his son. And he runs, right? In this particular culture, dignified men don't run. Mm-hmm. Dignified men don't run. But love will make you run, right? Grace will make you look foolish. And he runs to his son, and his son begins that speech, right? Father, I have, and he never gets to finish it. Right? The father interrupts him, he hugs him, he robes him, he places a ring on his finger, and he begins rejoicing. And it's this moment almost, right, reading between the lines of like, you may have left home, but my love never left you. And ooh, isn't that the gospel? And that connection that we thought was broken as readers of the story, that he thought was broken as he's living the story, it never stopped being offered. Right? The grace and the love was present the whole time. And the welcome we feared we'd lost is waiting all along. And the grace of God isn't something we earn by getting it all right. It's something we receive when we come home.
Yeah, I think if anything, this story for me, as I imagine God in the place of the Father, is just how big and how lavish God's grace and love for us is. Because like you said, here's the son, preparing, ready to go. And the father doesn't even need that. And God doesn't even need that. First of all, God is already looking out for us no matter how far we've stepped away from God. I have this interesting experience working in this job where people come through the doors of this church and they feel as though they need to say, now, I haven't been in church for 4 years, and this is the reason. It started out with COVID and, whatever it is. And I always feel like, oh, no, you don't have to explain all of that to me. We're just so glad you're here. And if I feel that way, I think about how much God feels that for us, right? Oh, no, 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 you don't have to explain. I'm just so glad you're here. I just love you that big, and I just love you that much that there is nothing that you could have done, no amount of time, no hurtful thing you said about me that could divide our love. And it is, like you said, isn't that the gospel? God just out there on the road to meet us. And it's so powerfully shown in this story. That connection comes right back without in any need for anything else.
Yeah, it's the beauty of the gospel and it's the scandal of the gospel.
Yeah,
right?
and
Because
it's not what we
it's this
expect.
grace that's offered that he doesn't have to earn. He comes back home and he's welcomed freely. And there's this piece, I think, in all of us that goes, okay, but yeah, shouldn't he like rebuild trust first, right? The ring on his finger, right, in that day and age allows him to now do business in his Father's name. What has he earned to justify that level of trust, right? He's already abandoned his Father once. And so there's this piece inside of us that goes, right? Like, surely he needs to come back and then like, in good Christian church fashion, like, here's the 10 steps, things that you need to do now in order to get back to where you are. And then, right, on step 3, you'll get the robe. Step 5, we give you the sandals. You would think it would be in reverse, but we really want you to understand, that things are hard. These boots are made by walking, and you don't got them yet. And then finally, on step 10, we'll give you the ring, and then we've got a really big celebration. It's not how it happens, right? It's an immediate, right, of grace is free. It's not about earning. It's about belonging. Coming home was enough. And that's the beauty of the gospel. That's the beauty of grace, right? We don't earn the love of God. We are freely given the love of God. We then share it, right? But the grace that is offered to us is free. And so we see that play out in the story. And then there's a piece of us that really, pushes against that because we do want there to be consequences, right, for the younger son. We want him to have some kind of repercussions for the choices he made. But that's when we find ourselves out in the backyard.
Well, exactly. And so there's this other piece to the story, right? So as you're sitting here saying he really needs to take some steps before he's allowed to get his ring back, and there needs to be some consequences, I think that comes from a place of two older brothers in the story. I'm not putting you in the story, but I can say for myself that I definitely find myself on the older brother's side of the fence here. So we know, because we just read it, that all of this happens and tra-la-la, and the father's so happy to see the younger son, and the older brother, who hasn't gone out and squandered his living, has been working every day trying to serve the father. He says, I've been here serving you, trying to do what he's supposed to do. There's no party for him. And I think it's very natural for those of us that have this tendency to go, wait, that's not fair. And I think the interesting thing that we see in the response of the older brother is that there is a disconnection between the older brother and the father too.
Yeah, not all prodigals leave home.
Yeah, isn't that true?
And the older son has misunderstood his relationship with the father.
Yeah.
He's never once seen himself as the father's son.
Yeah.
Right? He says it in the story, right? You treat me like a slave. But he was never treated like a slave. That was his perception of the relationship. And, there's this, I think, challenge for a lot of us. We see there's a lot of stories like this in the scriptures, right? The workers in the vineyard, right? We've been here longer, we should get paid more. It's like, well, no, we agreed. You're all going to get paid the same. And we go, ooh, no thank you, right? Like, I feel like there should be, like, do I at least get, like, a better title? Do I get a title, right? Like, but it's the same. There's an equality in the Gospels. And the challenge here is that the younger son feels like he deserves something for staying. I've worked, I've slaved. You've never even given me a goat. Right? A fatted calf is a symbol of celebration. And so the son is also telling us a lot about him there, too. He doesn't feel like he's done anything to deserve being celebrated. Doesn't feel like he needs a fatted calf, but he would like a goat, a meager animal, just something to recognize that he's been there, that he's done the work. I think the challenge with that idea, right, of not all prodigals leave home is some of us stay close. We follow all the rules. We do all the right things. but we also then quietly build up resentment. And when the older brother hears the music and there's a feast that's going on and he smells it, he doesn't go celebrate. He stands out in the fields with his arms crossed, bitter and angry and resentful. And sometimes we can do all the right things. We can read scripture, we
That's
can go to
right.
church, we can say all the right prayers, we can do all the right things, and we can be really angry and still be really disconnected with God. And we can be faithful but bitter. And we can be present but we can be distant.
Yeah, and I think that this forces us to step out of our human way of thinking, right? Because in our human world, in our most human way of being and interacting, we have this kind of system that's set up in our head, right? And that's how, we play it in a lot of our relationships. I have done this thing for you. I have been loyal to you, and therefore you will do the same for me. I mean, we see it all the time across our culture in different ways. Let's take it, though, in the workplace. A lot of times, I think there's this idea that employees that have been loyal to a company and have shown up every day on time and have taken exactly the right amount of vacation days and sick days, when it's time for a promotion, they feel like they've earned that spot because of what they have done and what they have shown. And maybe, but man, think about the amount of resentment that comes in when someone is hired externally. And they're left here thinking, I've done all of the things. That's really hard to wrap your mind around. And I think what we have to remember, and I think this story really highlights it, is that in God's way, it is not the same as we interact as humans. And it's so hard, especially if you have these tendencies to play on fairness. And I have gone to church and I have read my scripture, and so things should go well with my life. And then when something happens and you see a person that has been a prodigal, and things are going well for them, and it's so confusing, it starts to kind of nip at your perception of who God is. And I think what God is telling us here in this story is, no. You don't need to do anything. Goes back to kind of this idea of prevenient grace. I have loved you all along. Everything that I've had has always been yours. There is nothing that you have to do to earn it. It's interesting because both the younger son and the older son had this perception of earning it or getting right with the father to get this certain thing. And the father is like, no. You already had my love.
Yeah, and I think what's so, as poignant here as you pull the text out is that older brother disconnects fully from the family.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't say, my brother, right? He says, your son.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And the father goes, no, your brother, right? And then he says, and then he disconnects from the father, right? I'm just your slave, right?
Yeah.
I'm not your son. And the father brings them both back. The first thing he says is, no, this is your brother. And the second thing he goes, you are my son. And everything I have has always been yours. And there's some clarity that goes out. But what I love about this story is the juxtaposition, right? The father runs to the younger son. He sees him and he runs. But he also walks out to the older brother. The father pursues both of them. And I think we miss that sometimes in the story when we talk about it. The father goes to both of them. They both feel disconnected. They both feel unwanted. They both feel like they can't do enough or haven't done enough, or they both want different things out of it. And yet the father pursues both of them. Just like he runs to the younger son, he steps outside to plea with the elder son. But the haunting part of the story for me, the thing that keeps me up at night, is this is a story that ends with no resolution.
Yeah.
We don't know if the older brother goes in.
Yeah.
We don't know if he lets grace find him too. And because of that, we're left with this kind of open-ended thing. And that, I think, is the challenge of connection, right? It's always a choice, especially in our relationship with God. We are invited into grace, but we are not forced. We are welcomed in, but we are not coerced. And in this Lenten season, as we think about standing in the clearing, I think we have to ask ourselves, where are we currently in this story? Are we far off, wondering if we can really come home? Are we standing outside with our arms crossed, feeling unseen and uncelebrated? Are we like the father, waiting with hope, aching for someone we love to come home? Or maybe we're just a little bit of all three. But the thing that I love the most, the thing that I hold on to in this story, is that the Father is coming towards us with arms open wide, because grace doesn't wait for the perfect apology, right? With the connection that can't be lost, only received. And the clarity of connection means realizing that self-righteousness can build as high a wall as the rebellion of leaving, and both sons are invited into the same grace. One came home from a far country, the other just has to come in from the backyard.
Well, I think that that's such a great reminder for us, right, as we go into our week, wherever we find ourselves, to kind of ruminate on this story. Think about where you see yourself, and just remember this big, big grace that God offers us.